I wanted to take a few minutes to highlight the results of some recent surveys we conducted, and along the way describe some recent trends in data and machine learning within companies, and also give you guys a sneak peek of the program over the next few days. So first, last July we released a survey. We drew over 11,000 respondents, and at that time, many of our respondents already indicated that they had machine learning models in production. So with all the hype around AI, it's very tempting to jump into use cases and data types that you may not be familiar with. But the reality is, according to our surveys and the surveys of others, the companies who have successfully adopted machine learning do so by building on existing analytic products like BI. And this means, in practice, that you take your existing system and layer machine learning on top of it. So take, for example, deep learning, which is a huge topic in this conference over the next 2 days. Many companies are using deep learning in a few ways, including, one, replacing or augmenting existing machine learning systems. So we've had tutorials from Francesca Lassari of Microsoft of how to use deep learning, for example, to augment your time series forecasting tools. We also had tutorials about deep learning for recommender systems. And you can also, of course, use deep learning to improve your existing machine learning product by augmenting new data types like images and video. So machine learning will not only start appearing in more products and systems, in many ways, it will also change the way we write applications and software. The important thing to note is that we are still in a highly empirical era for machine learning, so there's not a lot of theoretical understanding for when and why it works. In particular, there's still the need for 3 important ingredients, which is big data, big compute, and big models, because the deep learning architectures are getting bigger and bigger. So building a strong machine learning practice requires foundational technologies, and that's basically the theme of this talk. And data is going to be key. And getting data flowing, cleaned, and in usable form is going to be key to sustaining machine learning in your company. So with an eye towards the importance of machine learning, we recently completed another survey. This one drew over 3,200 respondents. And we had 2 high-level goals. The first is, what are you folks using? So what libraries, what platforms, what frameworks? And what are you building? So are you building the foundational tools in order to guarantee success in your machine learning practice? So one of the first questions we asked was, what are you building? And not surprisingly, data integration was on the top of the list. So in my mind, actually, more people should be paying attention to this, because everything begins with collecting and aggregating data. And in today's world, of course, that means high volume at high velocity and from many, many different sources. So we have many, many talks at this conference over the next 2 days from leading practitioners and companies on data integration and data pipelines. So once you have your data collected, an important part is to get it ready for machine learning. Today, that means in practice involving domain experts, right? So in order to clean data, you have to have some context. So usually that means having a user interface where a domain expert can train a machine learning model that can do the data prep and data cleaning at scale. And actually, I want to give a shout out to, speaking of user interfaces, there's a very interesting project in the expo hall. It's from MIT. It's called North Star. So if you get a chance, stop by their booth. But there's also going to be many talks about data prep, as well as sponsors at the expo hall at this conference. So once you have your data in place, you need to know what data you have and who can use it. As you can see, about a third of our respondents are working on data catalogs. And some companies are actually beginning to build their own solutions. So for example, WeWork has an open source project called Marquez. Uber announced an internal data governance and data catalog solution called DataBook. And Paco Nathan will be giving an executive briefing on data governance and data catalogs later this afternoon at this conference. So in the past, we got by with a cavalier attitude towards our data sources. That is beginning to end, right? So with the discussions about ethics, we need to know about data lineage and provenance, which really comes down to where does your data come from, how was it gathered, how was it modified along the way, and who touched it last. So the need to reproduce and audit your machine learning pipelines is increasingly becoming a legal and security issue. So there are going to be a few talks at this conference on how companies have built internal data lineage systems, which actually is quite a challenging task because you can imagine an environment where you have many, many different data frameworks and data systems. So it's hard to actually incorporate logging, precise logging into each of these systems. So I want to give a shout out to a couple of talks, one from Intuit and one from Netflix. They'll talk about how they built their internal data lineage system. And of course, we have a sponsor in the expo hall, Pachyderm, who also has an interesting data lineage solution. So as the number of data scientists and machine learning experts grow within your organization, you have to standardize libraries, models, and features, right? So you have to incorporate collaboration, and maybe you begin to introduce automation. So one of the big topics of this conference is data science platforms. So there will be numerous companies explaining what kind of data platform they have, what libraries they support, what trade-offs and design choices they made. But we also have many vendors in the expo hall who have interesting AutoML solutions, which is one aspect of data science platforms, including determined AI. So in the same survey, we found a vast majority of companies already have a portion of their data infrastructure in the cloud. And interestingly, the people who use a public cloud, many of them, I would say about 60% or more, actually use multiple cloud providers, right? So they're not locked into a single cloud vendor. And also, a lot of people, we found, over a third are already beginning to use serverless technologies. And there are many reasons for doing that from a data perspective. So for example, for data pipelines, among other things, and inference for machine learning. There will be an interesting talk tomorrow morning by Eric Jonas, who will give an overview of a recent UC Berkeley paper where they lay out their view on the current state and the future of serverless technologies. So our thesis is the use of machine learning will grow even more in the next few years. So for one thing, 5G is beginning to be rolled out, and that means machine-to-machine applications, many of which will incorporate machine learning. And there's also going to be a new generation of specialized hardware, particularly for deep learning, both for inference and training, both at the edge and at the data center. So in particular, the generation of deep learning hardware that will come out probably around Q3, Q4 will really greatly accelerate training. So we're talking, I'm not supposed to say this, but 40x speed up in training. So you can imagine a training task that took you 40 hours will now take you 1 hour, right? So that means in practice that data scientists can now run many more experiments. And remember, we're still in a very empirical era for machine learning. So here are a couple of other indicators that machine learning will grow within companies. So several years ago, one of the hottest jobs in the industry was data scientist, and that's still a very attractive job. Although I have to say, the term data scientist has kind of become muddled a little bit. So I was talking to someone the other day where he said, so this is a tech company in Silicon Valley where their business analysts, so these are the people who run SQL queries, have the title of data scientist, right? So there's been a lot of kind of confusion about who to call data scientists. So a few years ago, we started to notice a new title emerging, particularly in the San Francisco Bay Area, but that has since grown out of this area. And that was a machine learning engineer. And this is a role that sits somewhere between data science and engineering and operations. They tend to be higher paid than data scientists, and they're usually tasked with really bringing things to production. And as you can see, there's a certain amount of rebranding among data scientists, right? So data scientists who 2 years ago referred to themselves as data scientists now want to be referred to as machine learning engineers. So another sign is the emergence of new tools. So here's one tool, MLflow. It's only 10 months old. As you can see, there's a lot of traction with this tool. So among other things, so this tool has 3 components, but one of the most widely used components is one that allows data scientists to track experiments and manage experiments. So MLflow is useful for people with small teams, so even individual data scientists can benefit from using it, but also large teams of data scientists. So there are cases where companies with thousands of models in production are using MLflow. So projects like MLflow will make machine learning development much easier to manage. But it's much more than MLflow. So there are other startups. So one of them is here, Comet.ml and Verta.ai. But as we are learning, there are many important considerations that arise when it comes to machine learning. So last year, I started to give talks around the notion of managing risk. And thankfully, the research community has stepped up to the plate. So many of the foundational technologies I covered earlier, right? So data lineage, data governance, data integration, they all matter when it comes to auditing your applications for fairness, security, and privacy. So we have a lot of talks about how to do machine learning in a privacy-preserving way. We'll even have a 40-minute session on machine learning on encrypted data right after keynotes. So one session I'd like to highlight when it comes to fairness is Sharad Goel of Stanford will speak this afternoon at 2:40. They have a recent survey paper on fairness in machine learning, which you will want to see.